Push start type of band's cool, but the tent plans. I'm back on my bender rolls for the kicks. They quick to give them 2 cents. Put my circle tight like we glued hands. Like I don't believe in new friends. Trail light, I know the ice thin. I drop the song, get a few wins. I crave the comfort in my own skin. Really, I just wanna feel the world spin. If I check, watch me double that. I get it lit, I watch it bubble up.
Hey, what's up, everybody? How's it going? This your boy Frankie with We Are the Brand podcast, presented to you by Fabre Media. And in the studio today, we have a very special guest, Brittany Rogers, an author, therapist, a life coach. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Obviously, you know, we're coming from south side of Chicago, coming up north. So just tell the people a little bit about, you know, who you are, a little bit more thorough, and we can jump into this and see what we can talk about today.
All right. So I'm a therapist. I like to call myself a millennial therapist because I feel like it took me a while to be comfortable being a younger person in the field that I'm in. I feel like when I first started, I got a lot of like questions from working with like adults about like, what can you teach me? What can you tell me? You know, because they have all of these years on me or whatever. So I'm very much like very proud to be a millennial because I feel like we are very big in like changing narratives and changing the game. But as far as like my brand, so few things. I do traditional, I call myself non-traditional in the sense that when people think of a therapist, they don't think of me. I think that a lot of I'm not going to say a lot, but some of the things that like I was taught in school and all of that about like the profession, I don't want to subscribe to that. So I kind of do my own thing. So, for the sake of like what I'm explaining, I do traditional therapy as far as like individual therapy for the most part. I work with a great Black woman who's been in the business for 10 years. So I kind of got started into the private practice world through her. But then I also last year developed my own brand and business, which is Be the Change Therapeutic Services. And so what it consists of is I wanted to figure out how I could use my skills and my degrees and my licenses in as many ways as possible and not limit myself to that traditional individual therapy scope. So I got into, you know, speaking more, and I want to do workshops and I want to facilitate groups, and I do life coaching. And my life coaching, the way that kind of came into play was when I was still before I really started doing private practice full time, I was working for like these treatment centers and things of that nature. But people would come to me either on social media or people that I knew and be like, you know, can I talk to you? Like, can I pay you for your time? And I'm like, I don't see why not. But you know, because therapists have certain ethics and guidelines and things of that nature, I had to be strategic about what that would look like. And I had to be mindful of like what type of clients that I would accept through that realm. And so I was talking with my own therapist and she was like, sounds like you're kind of doing life coaching. I'm like, we're gonna go with that. But I feel like for people who are entrepreneurs, another main reason why I wanted to do it is because many people don't have traditional insurances, like your barbers, your hairdressers, you know, all these other people who don't work for, you know, a company struggle to have like that brand, that, you know, the best brand of insurance. And so I wanted to provide coaching or therapy in a way where it was affordable for people. And so that's also what kind of put me in that lane, because now I can kind of do this on my own, you know, again, with private practice, we split, you know, whatever I make and things. So I'm like, this is something I can do that I feel like is my service to people who don't necessarily have it or want to pay, you know, $150, $200 to get some form of therapy. And so that's kind of how coaching came along. But yeah, so that's my Be the Change Therapeutic Service is my baby. It is something that I'm very proud of. And so anytime I get an opportunity to just do something different, like a few weeks ago, I was booked to this lady reached out, wanted me to like come and facilitate a therapeutic conversation for a brunch she was having. It was like a brunch with her girlfriends that she had arranged. And so the vibes were so great. It was nice to be able to sit and just, she let me come eat. Her daughter was a chef. The food was amazing. Like, it was a great experience. And so I want to do more things like that. Like, I want to be able to enter spaces where, we are just having a good time and we want to have deeper conversations. And me being able to kind of help facilitate that is important to me. So there's that with the brand. And then we have the book.
Yes, we have the book.
We have the book, which is the newest piece to what I do. It's called The Things I Wish I Knew, and it is a millennial's guide to learning the mental and emotional concepts that the school system and our parents didn't teach us. And the book is what I consider to be like my contribution to the culture. Like I said, up until maybe last year, I had been working at like treatment centers and in hospitals, and I've worked at pretty much every level of care you can think of. I've worked with damn near every situation that you could ever see, every diagnosis, I've seen it. And so I facilitated a lot of groups in that work. And I was doing groups and I'm like, people shouldn't have to come to treatment to learn these things. Like, we should be able to talk about this in our communities, at our schools. Like, you shouldn't have to come to treatment to learn about attachment or boundaries or codependency and what all of that looks like. And so that inspired me to write a book where I took what I believe to be those really foundational concepts as to how we become who we are and how we grow and develop in our own understanding of our mental health and our emotional well-being. I wanted to put all of that in one book. So people see it and they're like, oh, this is
a lengthy book.
It's a book. So it's I love it because it's a hybrid between a self-help book and a textbook where you could read it from cover to cover, or you could like start at any chapter that kind of speaks to you at the moment and delve in right there, and then you can come back later or whatever. It's not something that is necessarily that you need to read cohesively, but it is it's a great resource for people who are like struggling with certain things and they're like, I want to have a better understanding of this. And to be able to do that as somebody, I wanted people to be able to see somebody that kind of looked like them or that they could relate to. And, I don't know how often people read. I don't think people read as much as they used to. So I felt like if anything, it could get somebody like out of this rut of like, oh man, I need to pick up a book. I ain't picked up a book in a while. This is a great place to start because from what I've been told is it's very conversational, and I wrote it that way. I didn't want people to feel like they were sitting here reading somebody lecturing to them. I wanted them to feel like they were having a conversation. So that's my baby, and I'm here to push it for life.
Hey, well, congrats to the book. Definitely something that I want to read myself. Definitely a big advocate of just mental health, and I love, psychology and just how the brain works and operates. I think that things like that really fascinate me because I just love how it creates our perspective in the world. It all has to do with the mind. So you obviously worked for different hospitals, and so you found a path. You found a niche where it's like, particularly for millennials, being able to speak. And then obviously, for millennials, these aren't, I would say maybe this generation was one of the first generations to really, really, especially because of social media, push the narrative of mental health, right? Before, we'll talk about physical health, but we never spoke about the health of the mind.
Absolutely.
And even how that affects your entire physicality, your entire body, and the health of your body. And so with this one right here, I definitely want to dive into the book a little bit more. I read the content and the context and just the different things that you have in there, topics of discussion. One of the things on the back of the book that I read is, and I'm paraphrasing, but doing your own healing, almost like taking the initiative of figuring out how to take this information and apply it to your life for yourself, right? And I think that's important because we spend most of the time with ourselves, in our heads, in our mind, and we don't always have a therapist or always have somebody we can vocalize our emotions or thoughts to and bounce things back from a perspective that is maybe more logical and less emotional, right? And so in this book, we have a plethora of different topics And obviously one of them being the last chapter, speaking about family and how family influences a lot of these habits and mindsets that we have in life. I think that's an important topic to discuss. So I want to hand it over to you to kind of, dive into what the significance is when it comes to the influence that we start with, which is the origin of influence with the family we grow up with.
Yeah, so I think it's tricky because at a certain point in life, we have to take responsibility for who we are, our habits, our behaviors. But it's a struggle for people who can very clearly direct negative behaviors or, habits to how they were raised.
Right.
And so at a certain point, it's like, yes, I can think back and I can say, hey, like, this is why I am the way that I am. Like, people look at their parents. Can I cuss on here?
Yeah.
They look at their parents and they're like, you fucked me up, you know? And it's like, all right, we can acknowledge that, right? But now what do we do with that? Like, where do you step in to make sure that you don't continue that you don't, you let those things go, or the people or the youth that come after you are learning something different. But, when it comes to like the book, the reason why I wrote it in the format where that family and environmental chapter would have its own section is because I would be writing for days in each chapter about like how our family gets us to where we are. So like we can start with chapter 1 on attachment, right? So more so speaking of how do we grow to attach ourselves to people in those sorts of attachments. So you can be somebody who is more so anxious, who's more so secure or avoidant, or we have a last one that's like an anxious avoidant. And so the way attachment even derived is from studying the relationships between mothers and their toddlers. Like that was one of the Mary Ainsworth, world-renowned psychoanalyst, started that study where she was looking at like how do these babies respond when their parents leave, and why do they respond that way, and being able to kind of use that to further, we've had psychologists that further develop that, in being able to really look at how do we have relationships with people, right? Like, so if you've ever dated somebody and to you they feel clingy, they probably have an anxious attachment style. And that's probably derived from some sort of fear or abandonment or a hot and cold parent that they may have had, that where they didn't know if they could depend on them. They, were nice to them sometimes and then they weren't nice to them other times. So they never know what version they're going to get. Those type of people turn into people pleasers, because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to piss anybody off because then they think that you may leave them or you're not going to like them anymore. And so it kind of all unfolds when we really think about where did this person come from and what did the people around them teach them. But also now, like, I see some people get stuck in well, that's just how I am. And no, you ain't got to be like that. Let's talk about what I mean?
Let's talk about real quickly, because, I hear it all the time, right? You hear people say, well, this is just how I am, with no initiative or no intentions of wanting to heal. Right. It's just kind of like, it's accept me for who I am, not recognizing that they're self-sabotaging their own life and their own relationships by accepting something that requires healing, right? Taking the first step to say, okay, I need healing in this. I need a therapist, right? I need to talk about these things that are rooted deep inside, even if they've been laid dormant, but awake when certain things happen in my life, like how I respond to certain things, show exactly what I've been taught or trained or how I've been my entire life since, I was a child, right? And so I tend to see and hear, time and time again, people just say or utilize that as an excuse. And for me, I recognize that as somebody not wanting to take accountability.
Absolutely.
Right? They want to avoid that. So they rather put that on something else or find an excuse or justify their reasons for doing something rather than taking accountability and recognizing why they were triggered and addressing that, right? Because the only thing we can control is ourselves, right? We're responsible for ourselves. Somebody can say the most foul thing, but at the end of the day, it's not my control over them. It's my control over myself that's going to dictate what this outcome looks like. So just on that note, like, what type of engagements have you had to deal with people who maybe lack the desire to take accountability, and how do you address that?
So it's hard. Some people are very comfortable in their misery. They're very comfortable in their trauma. And they don't know anything else because, again, like potentially where they grew up or who they grew up around may have gotten the wires crossed. So
Right.
chaos may feel like passion to me.
Right.
Love may feel foreign to me. It may feel uncomfortable to me, like real love. I may equate love with pain. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
And so, a part of what we have to do, I think, is very easy to take people's behaviors personally sometimes, especially when they feel like directed at you. But if you can take a step back and say, I clearly see you don't have it all. Like there is healing that
Right.
needs to happen in you, and I can see that. And so I'm not gonna allow myself to internalize, like you said, like somebody gives you this negative message. If I have the awareness of knowing that I'm not that person, or I
Right.
don't do those things, or
Right.
that isn't in alignment with my values, then I can acknowledge that, like, that's projection.
Right.
And so when it comes to like working with people who avoid accountability, those are where your boundaries come in, because usually it's a very frustrating experience. Like I work with a lot of adults who are struggling with apologies they never got
Right.
from parents and, you know, other significant figures in their life, and wanting those people to be accountable
Right.
for what they did or what they said. And we work so much on what you just described as far as like understanding where our control lies.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I can't change that person. I can't make that person tell me sorry or acknowledge, you know, the pain or the abuse or whatever I had to go through with them. But I can dictate what that relationship with them looks like. I can understand that now as an adult, I don't have to choose to be connected to somebody who
Right.
is dysfunctional, who is toxic, who brings up, you know, very poor or negative memories for me.
Right.
As much as I feel compelled. So, you know, that's still your family. I'm the therapist that's gonna tell you, fuck that. Like,
Right.
no, anybody can get it. When I say get it, anybody can get those boundaries. If
Right.
they need some distance, then put some distance there. You know what I
Right.
mean? But at the end of the day, we can't make people hold themselves accountable. All we can do is understand and encourage, obviously, like, have you ever thought about it this way? Maybe if you looked at it, you know, this way, do you think you should talk to somebody like that? Like, we can always try to engage those conversations, but people are going to ultimately make those choices on their own.
Right. And so when you're having these conversations, you know, with your patients, like what are some of the things that you notice in terms of trying to, you know, make the conversation turn into something that's going to be productive? Do you ever find yourself dealing with certain clients where, or patients where they almost just, they're there just because they have to be there, right? They're not there because maybe they truly need to be opened up. Like how do you decipher when you're dealing with your patients what to say, how to say it? How do you gauge or figure out maybe what these particular things are? Do you have a certain set of like questions?
Mm-hmm.
Do they tend to answer those things themselves? Like, how does a typical session go for you?
So when we talk about, like, again, these individual sessions that I'm doing, they always start with an assessment, and it kind of helps to break the ice. So we discuss, you know, your background, your history. And it's stated that, like, obviously some of these things may feel really personal, and like first two sessions we getting into talking about your trauma and your abuse and things like that, it can feel like a lot. So I'll let people kind of open up as they see fit. Luckily, I feel like in the private practice realm, I don't get much resistance because these are people who are seeking me out.
Right.
They want to do this, you know
Right.
what I mean? Versus like when I used to work in treatment centers, people's parents may be putting them there. They may have to go because they're going to lose their kids if they don't get help. They may
Right.
lose their license, you know. So you deal more with more mandated or required, you know, people in those spaces.
Right.
But luckily with what I do, there is very much my clients know I expect them to do some work
Right.
because this spot can be for somebody else. If you're not going to come in and be present and, or it gets to the point where, people like, oh, it's great. Things are going fine. All right. I mean,
how many times do you hear that?
More than I would like.
Yeah.
And it's one thing for people to get to that space after maybe weeks or months of us working together. But like, if you just start seeing me, this session 3, we just got through the assessment. So I'm just now done with all my questions and now the ball is in your court.
Right.
Things have been fine. I can't do anything with that. And I tell them like, I need you to, I usually encourage people to like keep a note, especially if you're consistently in therapy, like, write down what's happening, your feelings, any conflicts, like your highlights, your lowlights. Like we talk a lot about that. So it's more so, like I said, I feel lucky that I get in the position where I don't necessarily have to make people come. It's like either we're going to do this or we're not. And I'm going to talk to you about what the expectations of like what that looks like.
Right.
But I mean, I had a very interesting experience like maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And that also kind of highlights like how therapists have to continue to do their own work because I had somebody like fire me in like the first 10 minutes of a session.
One of the patients?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was my first time seeing her. She was a referral from the lady that I work with who had worked with her previously. I was supposed to be seeing her and her husband. And yeah, like the session, I kind of got in and explained like my spiel as far as, okay, we're going to start with the assessment. I'm going to be asking a bunch of questions. This is how it's going to go. And she was like, well, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't think this is a good fit. So yeah, you can bill me or whatever, but I don't think we need to do this. This never happened to me before. And I was very taken aback and I had like a little emotion behind it, whereas like mentally, and that's the funny thing about mental health, because in my mind, I know I'm not supposed to take these things personally because whatever that lady was dealing with or going through or whatever that made her not want to work with me anymore within like 10 minutes, that has nothing to do with me.
At all.
But it didn't feel like that.
Right.
My emotions were like, that was rude. I wanted to like run and cry in a corner for a second. But yeah, I like became overwhelmed with emotion. And so, which was out. Then I got upset with myself for being emotional about it. But again, this is I'm a therapist. I don't mean I get it right. So I had to give myself some space, some grace.
Let's talk about that. I was going to go into a different direction, but I'll loop that back because I think it's very interesting, right? I mean, you're a human, right? Absolutely. You're a human being. You deal with real human issues, families, emotions, and all those type of things, right? So being a therapist, being somebody who's a resource for other people to, be able to speak to, right? Being a resource for other people to open up and hopefully find some type of a closure or, understanding of what might be taking place internally. How do you for yourself deal with these things? Because I can only imagine, right? Hearing all these things constantly, having to detach yourself from an emotional state, but then also having to work on yourself, right? How do you go about doing that? What are some of the methods that you find yourself doing?
So the first thing I'll say is I get people who obviously think that, it must be so hard. You're carrying so many people's stories and like trauma and all of that stuff. And I think where I am in my career, I am a bit desensitized to that. And that's not to say that I don't feel for people, because I do. Like I've cried in session with people like in that moment because what they were describing I could feel the pain for them or whatever. But as far as like when my day is over, I don't like really sit and kind of dwell on it like people may think that you do. Now, obviously, occasionally I think, like, oh man, like, it's more so like when people leave, like, I wonder if they're doing okay. Like, I hope they are right, but for the most part, I'm pretty okay with detaching. But what I will say is I have to be extremely mindful of what is going on in my personal life, because if I don't work, I don't make no money. Right. So like, let's say I can't afford to, I'll use breakups as an example.
I mean, breakups could be life wrecking.
Yes. And I'm somebody who feels very deeply. And so detaching and losing relationships is something that is very hard for me. And so because of the type of work that I have to do, and I have to be very present with people on a day-to-day basis, I cannot entertain things that are going to put me in that space where I'm like emotionally shot. I'm distracted. I can't do my work. You know, some people, they can go to work and not talk to nobody all day and still work and have a bunch of things on their mind. I can't do that.
Right.
Because if my mind is somewhere else, my client is going to pick up on that, you know? So I think I have an extra layer of responsibility of making sure that I keep my life intact and don't invite anything that can be potentially chaotic in or detrimental to me emotionally.
Right. And so how do you go about doing that? Like, how do you decipher that? Do you do any like ritual practices?
Yeah, so I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy for 6 going on 7 years. And me and my therapist, we locked in for life. I don't know if I'm ever stop seeing that lady, just because I know that no matter what type of, you know, at this point I may see her every 2-3 weeks, sometimes once a month. But no matter what happened in that time of span, that span of time that may have been difficult, that may have been challenging or emotionally exhausting, I have that space. I know that session is coming. I'm going to get to let it all out. I'm going to get to feel really seen and really heard.
Right.
And that's been very valuable for me. So that's just one thing, is making sure that I'm doing my own work as far as, you know, because again, that was something else that I had to talk about with my therapist.
Right.
That last example I gave is like, what's showing up for me? Why was that such a trigger? And me being able to reflect, okay, you do not like rejection. You do not respond well to, you know, feelings of like not abandonment, you know what I mean? Or being pushed away or being prejudged. And that's where that emotion came up for you. So just making sure that I don't hold back in my sessions, that I'm very truthful and I'm honest and I'm transparent, and I continue to work on my own awareness of why I do the things I do and why I feel and the things that I think. But I'm also very, I feel like I have great friends. And so being able to have a social life has been an outlet for me, you know, being able to connect with my homegirls and have a good time and laugh and like travel, like all of that is just really like, it feeds me. So on a day-to-day, like I just like to chill and relax after a long day. Like I don't do entirely too much. Very much like close with my mom. So just making sure that I use the relationships in my life the way that I need to, while also just kind of making sure I'm doing my own work.
Yeah. Are you a reader yourself?
So let me tell you this. I'm terrible because I do YouTube. Keeping Your Buck would be on YouTube. That's my other little baby.
YouTube University.
Absolutely. And so I do YouTube and I don't really watch YouTube. I wrote a book. I don't read as much as I should. So it's just very like, it's bad when I say it out loud. But no, I think so. When I got out of grad school, I did get back in touch with reading. And what I realized was my therapist recommended me a book called Attached because I started seeing her after a breakup. And so she recommended for me to read that book. And I fell in love with the content because it was already very on brand with the type of, you know, psychology and mental health that I was interested in. And so I was like, okay, so this is the type of stuff you like reading. Now that you're done with school and all of that stuff, like we need to just find your niche. So when we talk about like recent reads, I read that. A friend gave me The Alchemist. And so I read that I think twice over the last few years. And that was really special, you know, to me, because that wasn't probably a book I would have normally just picked up. But I feel like when somebody gives you a book out of their collection, it's meant for you to like read it.
Big facts.
So yeah, like love languages, that was a thing. So I picked up a few of those books and kind of read through them. It's just more so like the commitment, because then I started writing my own book. And while I'm writing my book, I didn't want to read no books. And that's also just because I had a very hard time wrapping the book up. Yeah. Because every day I was on social media seeing something, reading something that I felt like needed to be in the book. Right. And my friend that was helping me through the whole process was like, at a certain point, you have to decide to be done. Right. Because he used to always say, save it for book 2. I'm like, there might not be a book 2. But
now there's going to be a book 2?
I don't know. I don't remember that. It's still out for debate on that. But yeah, so I took that same type of perspective with reading. Is I feel like my brain would be exposed to too much, and I would want to go back and like. So now that I'm finally done with the book, I feel like that's something I can redevote myself to. Is like, because I definitely have bought like maybe 3 books over the last year that I need to like pick up and invest in and really get into, and so
I'm definitely a big advocate of reading. I love to read. I definitely notice that I go through seasons. Like some seasons, reading's one of those things I compare it to like going to the gym. Yeah. The more you go to the gym, the more you're going to want to go to the gym. The less you go to the gym, the less you're going to want to go to the gym. I find it similar with reading. It's like the more I read something, the more I want to read and the more I want to read. And so I kind of go through seasons, especially when I'm seeking truth, especially when I'm seeking knowledge and wisdom or perspectives, right? I think it's super important for people who aren't reading to, I mean, even if it's an audiobook, right? Which, do you have an audiobook for this yet?
I don't. And
that's
people
next.
keep mentioning it to me because that's like the new wave. And I was such a big like, I like pages. I like to pick it up. I like to feel it. Like that's my reading experience. Right. But I'm like, you got to cater to other people's reading experience. So my next step is to research how that works.
Okay, we could talk about it after this. Okay. It's not that difficult, but it is a lengthy book. So, but yeah, so reading for me is definitely something that I notice has empowered me. It's very therapeutic for myself, and it requires me to use my brain in a different way, and use my imagination, because our imagination is everything, right? Even this podcast, once upon a time, was just an imagination.
Absolutely.
Now it's here, it's physical, it's tangible. There's actual things that are happening that are applicable, that are going on right now. And so I think the imagination, when you can influence that, it's a powerful thing. So that's just a cosign for everybody out there. Go ahead and pick up a book, or at least get an audiobook, right? But what I do want to address, I think will be a real good topic of discussion, also considering that was your introduction to your therapist, is dealing with breakups. We deal with these things day to day, not saying one person in particular, but as a society, we're dealing with, breakups. We're dealing with people who we've invested in time, energy, resources, and this comes to an end. What and how do you gauge with yourself and your patients when it comes to these breakups? What are some key things of advice that you can give to people who are right now going through a breakup where it's messing with their day? They can't go to work. They're depressed. They have anxiety, right? What are some things or some advice that you would give?
So relationships end for many reasons, but usually once it hits a point where one party or both parties feels like it needs to end, when people feel like they want to like backtrack, or they're like, well, maybe it wasn't, the first step I tell people to do is like make you a pros cons list. And it was funny because I saw a tweet the other day that was like, once you got to start making a pros cons list, that relationship is over. But I like people to suggest people use them after the fact, because it acts as a literal reminder of the reality of it, because so much of what we hold on to is attachment, right? Like it's the fact that I felt I invested in this person, in this relationship,
the emotions,
the comfort behind it, you know what I mean? The safe space that they probably may not have even had, but it felt like they had in that person or in that relationship. And also, so making that list and then being able to really understand and see why those cons are big enough to have broken up over.
Right.
Also, just maybe assessing because usually when we get out of relationships, I don't care how great your relationship is, sometimes there are things that we neglect, that we let fall by the wayside. And so when people are in that space of trying to move on, I tell them to sit and really think on these things, like whether that be the gym, because I know when I start liking on somebody, first thing I'm doing is abandoning my gym time to go hang out and spend time and go out to eat and all this other great stuff. Yeah. So really sitting and reflecting, like what have I let go of, that probably was either very important to me, helped me feel productive, and just, help me feel like I was doing more with my life, or doing on the path that I was supposed to be on. And so I feel like that is a great source of distraction, number one, of getting me refocused on other things that are important. But as far as like other tips, I think we have to have an understanding of like, what are we holding on to, or what do we feel like we really lost?
Right.
Like, is it the person? Because usually it's not the person. It's the daily text messages. It's the habits. It's the dates. It's the, comfort. Like, it's not, and then also understanding like why the breakup may have been necessary, right? Like, maybe we tried, we gave it a good run, and we realized that we are just better off as friends, or we are better off as, individuals because we may not match up, especially for people who've, like, I work with a lot of couples and people who are married, and the beauty in being younger is I get to like see through like older women's lives as far as like what marriage is like for them, and what seems to be like, a very common themes just over.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So,
pertaining to the women,
yeah. So I feel like, and then that brunch that I did, we had very similar conversation. I'm like, so this is the thing. And I'm only going to speak for like the Black community, because most of these women, all the women I work with are Black women, that they end up settling. And it doesn't always start that way. Usually it's something that they find very attractive about their partner in the beginning, where it's like, especially like if they were single moms, like, he was great with my kids is one that I get, I felt so loved, I felt, protected, or, provided for, or whatever, something that I hadn't had before. But then kind of neglecting the other important aspects in a partner that we need to function in a relationship. So not just a financial support, but can this person be emotionally supportive, or is this person emotionally supportive and they're not financially supportive, and having a really good understanding of what your values are. Like, do you and this person see the same life together? Because I've had couples that have come into session, and in that first session, I learned things, and I'm like, you all had no business being together, let alone getting married.
Right.
And so when I have to ask that hard question of like, what's keeping you together, it's usually like love. Like, this is the person I want to spend my life with. But love is not enough.
Right.
It'll never be enough. When you don't have two people who are equally working towards the same things, who have the same values, who have similar beliefs. And so it's been an eye opener to see that, again, these Black women are hard workers, and they hustlers, and they take care of home, and they have subpar partners, that they have to ask, or to, repeatedly talk to about very basic things that have a lot to do with intention, which we've been talking about, like the intent behind like making sure I show up every day for my partner, as well as an awareness of like self, right? Like, especially for men, for Black men, I need them to be in therapy. I need them to have safe spaces where they can talk and have an understanding and hold themselves accountable and hold one another accountable, because that is a huge piece of what's missing in a lot of these relationships. And that's not to say that like women can't be accountable. They absolutely can fall into that realm. But at a certain point, we see, and this has been an interesting conversation I've seen on social media, is like when it comes to things like self-care and mental health and things of that nature, we see women creating these spaces a lot of the time. Right. And not even just the fact that therapy is a female-dominated field, but outside of like regular individuals who are wanting to discuss or create spaces for healing is mainly women. And so we have to figure out, there are certain men. There's a male therapist that I follow, King J. Barnett, who does a lot of talking about healing. There's another guy I follow who's a therapist in Pennsylvania who he has a book called Men to Heal. And so, but there aren't a lot of them that are like leading these conversations around like how Black men, or how men in general, can just be more in touch with their emotions, have a better understanding of their emotions. And it's definitely a two-way street when it comes to having functioning relationships.
Right. Well, I mean, definitely I believe sharing values is important, right? As you mentioned, like love outside of the emotion, love the choice, love the decision, comes with responsibilities, right? Comes with a way of acting, thinking, being patient, being kind, right? Having loyalty, right? Someone could love you, but they could be very disloyal.
Absolutely.
Definitely being emotionally available. And, as a man and a man of color, like, growing up, expressing your emotions was looked on as weak, right?
Exactly.
And it's like, yo, toughen up, like, stop crying, stop this, stop that. You be a man, you know what I mean? So those things have definitely been instilled in us.
Absolutely.
Since our childhood, even since a baby, right? And I think a lot of that also comes with, the masculine energy, right? Inherently, us as men, we were the providers, the protectors, right? The hunters. And that took a different type of persona, a different type of way of thinking, that emotions and the ability to let that out doesn't necessarily create a cohesive understanding or experience, right? But I will say that noticing the lack of fathers in homes, especially, in families, creates that dynamic a lot more, where you don't have a father who's in that particular place that can give guidance and direction, especially for men, in understanding what it is to be a man, and understanding how it is to love a woman, and understanding that, it's okay to speak about certain things. It's okay to express yourself in certain ways, because those things are healing.
And women perpetuate a lot of misogyny that results in our men being the way that they are. You know what I mean? You can't sit here and tell a grown man you want him to be more emotionally available and more vulnerable with you, but then you telling your son that he needs to stop crying because boys don't cry.
Right.
Because that's the disconnect, is the fact that now as an adult, I'm seeking these things from a male, but am I giving, the young men in my life, my sons or my nephews, my cousins, whatever that looks like, are we giving them these lessons that they need to be those types of men for somebody else?
Right.
Because it's a gap there. And that's something else that I talk about in the book, is like things that we have to let go of in order to be able to create the relationships and the environments that we want to create. We can't hold on to some of it and then try to and expect things to change.
Right.
Because it just doesn't work that way.
But do you believe that women actually want that from men? Do you believe that women naturally want men to be emotional like that, be sensitive like that, without that taking a toll on how they treat their man and his masculinity?
Yeah, so I think we have to take a step back from what we consider to be masculine, and build this understanding that as individuals, we all possess a certain level of masculine and feminine energy. I'm somebody that believes that. But again, I think that certain women, they don't help the cause for women like myself who want a man to be emotionally intelligent and be able to tap into that vulnerability, or to be sensitive, or to be empathetic. I think that there is a fine line. Like, I think, number one, the word like emotional has gotten a negative connotation to it, right? Like, saying, oh, that man, he's so emotional. Like, the way people even say it is like,
men don't like to hear
is
that.
it a man who is in touch with his emotions? Like, because that's what, like, the context of using emotional changes, the way people perceive that, So I think language is very important in knowing that. Like, even if I just use this as a quick comparison, Black women can sometimes get labeled as aggressive. More specifically, like dark-skinned Black women, when we're being assertive, and it's the same thing where I have to explain that, like, even if you take it in as aggression, because of how important language and verbiage is, I need you to understand that me being direct and me being, clear is assertiveness. I need you to break down in your brain the difference between the two. And I feel like people have to be conscious of the language that they use because of the connotation that's associated
Right.
with and who they're talking to. And I feel like the same thing has to happen for women and men. If I want my man to be comfortable being vulnerable and sensitive, I'm not gonna, when I'm upset with him or he's expressing himself like, oh my God, you being so emotional, because that's gonna send the wrong message.
Right, 100%. You know, and even to relate to that, like I was in a relationship where I'm very emotionally, you know, intelligent and connected with myself. I don't have a problem to express how I feel. And I understand, especially when certain emotions come on me, that I know how to hold those things in and pick what matters, right? Like, what's really going to matter after this? Is that emotion actually something that needs to be articulated to the person I'm with, so that way they understand where I'm coming from in a way that I know is going to be beneficial for the relationship, right? Together. And so, you know, being in a relationship, I had to deal with those particular things, right? Where it was like, my communication skills were there, right? I was very attentive. I was proactive and not just reactive.
Yes.
You know, I was involved in wanting to understand her mind, where she's at, her values, and then also expressing those particular things, and then also not coming from a place of judgment where it's like, okay, because this is your world, this is who you are. And so if I'm choosing to be in that world, it's not my place to create judgment, rather create understanding, because with that understanding, I can now have empathy and I can now operate in a way where it's conducive and the environment's conducive for us to grow. But going into it, it was like, you know, it just became more of like, all right, I'm the one communicating. And then it's like, you're just sensitive, right? Like those things were, you know, being, you know, projected towards me. And it's just like, I was like, man, like, I don't want to be called that. And so it made me have to like internally reflect, where it's like, yo, like, am I really being emotional? Am I really being extra sensitive? Like, maybe I shouldn't talk about X, Y, and Z, because it seems like that person doesn't want to have a conversation, right? Or they tense up or don't want to deal with conflict, even if the tonalities are calm, collective, right? And the environment is fit for that conversation. Because I also believe it's about timing when you bring up certain things. Because for me, I look at it like a strategy. It's like, I know what outcome I want. So based upon how you are right now, if I bring this up, the outcome ain't gonna be a win.
We talk about that in that communications chapter, okay?
So that part is something that I've had to learn through my own mistakes, because I used to always be the person where it's like, no, I got something to say. This is how I feel right now. And as I've gotten older through life and had some experience, and rather than just point the finger, took accountability and said, okay, I'm the common denominator in all of this. Like what are some things that I need to work on myself? And I knew that was one of those things. And so, you know, now it's like, all right, cool. Like, I might feel a particular way, but it's cool. And it gives me time to just chill on it and think on it rather than react on it, you know, and then bring those things up in times that I know are best, because I know that this person across from me is in a mental state that is going to be able to hear me. Because there's nothing worse than feeling some kind of way and then talking to somebody who ain't even hearing you. No matter if they're listening, they just ain't hearing you. And so the conversation goes nowhere, right? And then it just becomes more of a dead end or an argument. And so anyways, you know, what I'm getting into is from the man's perspective, you know, from the man's perspective of recognizing that reality that we deal with, and me being somebody who is emotionally intellectual and understanding of these things, even then, still having to deal with issues that you're like, I'm like, yo, like, I'm just asking for you to communicate. I shouldn't have to guess what you're thinking. I shouldn't have to guess how you're feeling. I shouldn't have to guess any of these things, right? And then boom, now it ended off of things that I had no idea about. You were silent about. You know, you speak up and you communicate so that way we can navigate and adapt and adjust and figure out what is necessary, so that way the outcome is a win. Right. And when you're in a relationship with somebody who is silent in those areas, it becomes too much, right? And obviously it wasn't something that was successful, but just to even, you know, address that, I just wanted to, you know, approach it from a man's perspective of being somebody who is on this side dealing with that.
Yeah.
You know, and then also, you know, after the breakup, you know, it was one of those things, and anybody who's around me, you would have never known, right, that I went through a breakup, like, emotionally. Because, you know, I look at things like this where it's like, don't take things personal, right? You know, I was like, all right, I can only control me. That's all I have control over.
Right.
That's her world. She's projecting her world, and I can't control that. So I had to release that.
Yeah.
And I had to come to terms and understanding within myself, because initially in those moments, it's like, damn, yo, what's wrong with me? All right. Like, yo, let me reflect, you know, am I inadequate? Am I not enough? Like where was the shortcoming? Right. And so, you know, rather than get into that place of depression or self-doubt, it was more like, okay, what I actually did was I did pros and cons. I was like, all right, what are the pros and cons here? From a communication standpoint, from a logical standpoint, right? From an emotional standpoint, like, all right, logically, this, you know, emotionally, this, and how is that relationship based on, you know, reciprocity? Like, is it reciprocal at all? And rather than get into, you know, eating disorder or the lack of work, I fasted. I fasted for 5 days. And in that state, it was just clarity of mind. And I found my answer. And rather than, you know, fight it, it was like, all right, no, like, I am good. Like it's not me. I'm cool. Like, and so things like that for myself, and, you know, just something that I would say worked for me and I would recommend for other people, is in those moments, try not to, you know, to maybe take things personal so much, right? Like that state of self-pity, you know, because that's how I found myself in previous times and previous experiences.
Right.
And I was like, how do I want this experience to be? Like, what outcome do I want?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
And that's huge as far as like getting to the space where you can do that, because relationships feel so like they're personal, they're intimate, they're close.
Right.
So most of the time when things go left, like we always fall into that, you know, what did I do wrong, or could I have done anything better? And, you know, like, is it somebody else? You know, all of these other random, like, crazy thoughts.
Right.
And what I usually tell people is put a time limit on it. You know, like, we all kind of want to sit in our feelings. We want to listen to some sad R&B. We want to throw, we want to throw the pity party. So I tell, okay, rocking that. But give it a time. You're gonna do it a day. Give yourself 2 days. Give yourself a week, and then we got to do something. Then we got to kick it in gear. Then we have to really, like. But in that time, I also need to be understanding of, like, why was it probably best that this relationship ended?
Right.
What did I learn from it? What can I take with me moving forward? And what role did I play? Like, I tell people that when I start talking to somebody new and we talk about, you know, past and stuff or last relationships, one of the first questions I'm asking is, like, I don't need to know all the details, but what did you learn from it? Because if you can sit and reflect some accountability on where you went wrong or where things, you know, the contributions you made, I can work with that.
That's important.
But if you sit there and you like, nah, she was crazy. Like, I just, you know, it was them.
That's a red flag.
It's a huge red flag because we are not perfect beings in any scenario, you know. So even if that acknowledgement for some women is like, I ignore red flags in the beginning because of whatever. And you can sit and say that at the end. I know damn well I ignored those red flags, and that was on me, and that's why that's why things transpired the way that they did. Right. Then that's a start. We can work with that as long as there's some awareness, as long as there's some accountability of the roles that we played in situations. But to circle back to your question of, like, do women really want these things? I think it more so comes down to making sure that whatever partner you're seeking, or as a man, making sure that you are seeking relationships with women who have just a more progressive standpoint on the idea of gender and masculinity and femininity and what that looks like, and do those things match up? Like, I would love, you know, if, and this is a very, like, dramatic example, but, like, I want a guy who's, like, in touch with those feelings and emotionally intelligent. But like I know you gonna protect me. You might care. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's I like that. Like because I need to know that mentally you can go there.
Right.
And every time I try to communicate with you about something, you're not gonna accuse me of nagging or complaining or all these other things, when it's like we should be able to have these conversations. It really shouldn't be this hard. But again, when it goes back to the type of how we were taught to be a communicator, what we were taught is supposed to look like, in a man and in a woman, and what these attributes are supposed to, possess. We got to start letting go of some of that if we want other pieces of our relationships to work.
Right. Would you recommend that in relationships for particular issues that, let's just say a man, right, he might emotionally feel something. Do you think that it's healthy and helpful where he may have a guy best friend that he can just let that out first before even
he brings it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if the issue has something to do, maybe her, like,
Right.
but no, I definitely think people need to use their resources and use their village and just allow whatever process works for you.
Right.
It's not to say that you should never talk about these things, but I know what is frustrating is to clearly see that someone is like visibly upset. And again, I'll use the as a woman, seeing a man be visibly upset about something and him not talking to me, like,
Right.
what's going on? Let's talk about it. But I also can't acknowledge that so many men have been put in a situation where they've been vulnerable and the shit was thrown back in their face. And I have to
Right.
tell women, you cannot do that. Like, you cannot beg this man to be understanding and to open up and to talk to you. And then when he does, you shit on him. You
Right.
cannot do that.
Right.
It's emotionally abusive.
100%. So, with that, I know you said that, you would ask particular questions. What set of questions would you recommend people who are starting to date, or starting to get to know each other? What are some things or good questions that they should be asking one another? Because, and I'm saying that under the understanding that it's not just a fling. It's like, all right, I'm dating this person with intentions.
Yeah.
So there's intentionality behind it. What are some questions or some key things that we should be aware of or potentially ask during that process and that state?
So I think we need to have more conversations around values, and also maybe roles, because I know that, regardless if you're straight, you're gay, like all relationships have to have roles in them where certain people feel comfortable doing something this way and the other person feels comfortable doing something that way. And so we just need to, again, make sure that it matches up. That, again, if I ask men, like, do you see yourself get married? Because I'm not going to assume that, right? Just because you're dating.
How soon do you ask that?
I ask it out the gate. No. I mean, I feel like that's a question I probably ask at least within like the first few dates, maybe the first 2-3 dates. Just because.
Do you think that that's like abrupt or like?
No, because I mean, we're in our late 20s,
Right.
so early 30s, most people. So it's like, those are the things people do at this age. We're
Right.
watching people get married and have kids and all that other stuff. So it's not that I'm saying like, you trying to marry me, but more so like,
What's your thoughts on marriage?
is that something that you see for yourself?
Right.
Because like I've dated or started to get to know guys who live a very like fast-paced life, whether they be like a celebrity barber or a DJ who travels around the world. And me personally, if you don't slow down, I can't see that life for you. So I'm going to ask you, is that something that you see for yourself? Because
Right.
then that'll let me know, like, or maybe later down the line, there are things or conditions that you'll change around your work to make that conducive.
Right.
So I'm very, like, again, if that's marriage is a value for me. So
Right.
I'm not going to sit on that too long because,
Right.
again, I would want a relationship so that way we can start building and working towards a potential future together that may involve marriage.
Right.
So I'm not going to set myself up and wait too long to have that discussion. But yeah, so values as far as like the important stuff, the lives that you see for yourself moving forward. What does that look like? What is important to you? And really listening to those answers, right? Like you could find out very early on that somebody didn't want to have kids. And you've as somebody who wants kids, they might change everything for you. So now it's like, as much as I may like you, I know those things don't match up. So those are conversations that we kind of need to have. Like, North side versus South side. Which side of the city we going to, you know, where you see yourself planting roots.
Are you a Cubs fan
like,
or you a Sox fan?
Okay, like, you know, so family, right? Like, you may meet somebody who you may be super close with your family and they don't have really a relationship with theirs. So like, what would that look like? You know, what sorts of inner deeper things may go on with them because of that. And it may be the therapist in me, but I try not to pass judgment, but I'm very big on like picking up on like things that most people will probably just be like, oh, that's just a part of them. No. Right. Because I know that potential experiences or situations can lead to other behaviors. And so I the way I phrase it to people is I don't necessarily say that it's a red flag when I first meet somebody or I'm getting to know somebody. I'll mark it as like a yellow flag, because it could be something that you've worked through or you're working through or you have an awareness of and you understand how it shows up for you. Then we can move forward with that. You get the green. But if you're not aware about it, if you don't understand how it's impacted you, and then I can tie that to like some negative behaviors you have, then it's a red flag sort of situation. So
So what kind of put a timeline on that for me? Like, obviously, you know, for people out there, for you, it seems like being a therapist, your understanding of operating in that way, it's a normality. It's something that you're used to because you also advise it, right? And study it. But what kind of timeline would you put on that for people dating to get around to these questions and understanding of their set values and where they want to be in 5 years or 10 years? What do you think's a good like time span, and under what conditions? Is it like, okay, maybe we went out to eat a couple times, or is it, okay, we went out to eat a couple times, we're spending time with each other, we're doing things, spending money together, you know, gifts are happening, acts of services are happening, like, what's the metrics?
So you said dating with intention, meaning like, you know, we ain't just kicking it. Like, we like each other, we are investing time and energy and potentially money, all of that stuff into one another. So I don't necessarily think that we need to wait too long. And again, that could be contingent on age. Like I said, if you're somebody in your early 20s listening to this, you may take a little longer, even though the younger ones that are coming up, they've been on top of stuff. They ahead of the game. But again, like being in your mid to late 20s and early 30s, like, we, at this point, a lot of people done dated around, you know what I mean? We should have a really good, and this is something else I suggest for people, is having a very good understanding of what you want, what you need, what you don't want, what you don't need. What are your non-negotiables? What are you willing to compromise on? Because then that makes this whole dating process very easy to weed people out, and not have to invest too much emotion or energy or time into it, because you can see these things very clearly through the gate. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that there is a time frame. I think that the sooner, actually, the better, versus like you've been talking to this person and dating them for 6 months and you just not finding out that something that's huge for you is a deal breaker for them, you know? So I would say, like I said, if you all are spending time consistently and also just listening too, because usually, again, at this age, you should be having some really good conversations, and people will volunteer and tell you information that you probably need to know or keep in mind. So just making sure that you're engaged and taking in the information that this person is sharing with you.
So in terms of like healing, because I think this is an important part as well, right? It's like, how much therapy does a person get before it's just like, you don't want to heal? Like I think healing should have a time span, right? Where it's like, I've got to a particular point where it's like, I took accountability. I understand what is.
Mm-hmm.
Now let me take ownership of that and start doing that inner working myself. Like,
Right.
because I feel like a lot of people, it's just like, they're just, I mean, we're always growing and healing, but it's like, when are you going to be healed? Like, how much longer are you going to let daddy not being there affect your relationships? How much longer are you going to allow this betrayal affect everything else? Right. Like, at what point are you going to surrender those things so that way you can live a life that you really want and love and in abundance? Like, what kind of timeline is that? Like, how long before it's like, all right, like, what's going on?
So I think it can vary. I think that people have to, I think the main thing people neglect when it comes to what they're struggling to heal from is most of the time acceptance. Accepting what took place, accepting how it changed you, accepting how things may be different moving forward.
Right.
That's the very first step to being able to heal from anything. Is just accepting the reality of what happened and what it was. And a lot of people will tell you, like, I just don't know if I can accept it. Well, you will remain stuck.
Right.
Because it's that lack of acceptance that hurts you. So one of the other chapters in the book is called the reality gap. And the reality gap is a concept from another therapist where pretty much it just describes the space between where you are and where you thought you would be. You know what I mean? So, and the uncomfortableness or the distress behind that. You know,
Right.
I'm 30. I thought I would be married with kids and my career would be taking off. And now, you know, you look at yourself at that age and you're like, damn, I'm not there.
Right.
And I have to sit with that reality every day. But the first part of working through that is like accepting where you are and understanding, like, is this a gap that I can close? Like, can I work towards some of these things, and what's in my control and what isn't in my control, you know? So I think people have to make the choice to work towards acceptance, number one, and then gaining an understanding of what they want their life to look like after that. Like, despite having this experience, how can I channel some of that maybe pain or that hurt from it into a way that is more positive,
Right.
that benefits me, versus sitting and kind of dwelling on the negative parts of it.
Right.
And so a lot of that just starts with, you know, I'm very big on self pep talks, because you could have a string of negative thoughts that you're going through, and all it takes is you being like, we're not gonna go down that road.
Right.
I'm gonna flip this. I'm gonna shift my perspective. That's
Yeah.
a lot of the work that I do with my clients, is getting them to understand the power in shifting perspective, because
Right.
it makes all the world a difference. If I wake up every day and I hate my job, and I wake up in the morning and I'm like, fuck, I hate this job, what type of day you think it's gonna be? It's gonna be a miserable day.
Right.
Because you already woke up with the mindset that you don't want to do this, you know what I mean? Versus like, man, the reality is I wish I was doing something different,
Right.
but I have to work with what's in front of me, or I have to make steps to get out of this job, because
Right.
I'm not gonna sit here and I can't sit here and complain about something that I'm staying in, that I'm doing nothing about.
Right. Right. So, how important is gratitude in healing? How important is gratitude in handling these things?
I think it's a major component, because it was funny. I left a comment on somebody's tweet like some weeks ago, and I didn't expect for it to get the attention that it did. And I mentioned being a therapist, and people were like, they hated it. So it was pretty much alluding, like, I think the original tweet said something about like, don't you hate like people who just seem like they always going through something? It's like, damn, like you just can't, it just can't never be positive, whatever. And people were like dragging her, like, you know, what if they have mental health issues, and what if they're dealing with stuff and they have childhood trauma and all these things. And I just came in and I gave the perspective of, you know, most of the time those people who feel like they always going through something, they usually end up feeling like a burden, which is a natural feeling to have if you feel like you get one bad hand after one bad hand after one bad hand. But I have to remind those clients that it's usually a pattern of pessimism and not helping oneself that people find draining. Not that they struggle, You know, we all struggle. We all have different degrees of struggles, right? Like I may not compare my day-to-day struggle to somebody that's homeless that don't know, you know, where their next meal coming from or where they gonna lay their head at night. That's a different degree of struggle, you know, and I can acknowledge that. But most people took my response well, but other people, of course, like blew it up to be like, well, how are you gonna, you know, tell somebody that they can't? And it's like, you're missing the two key parts of this: constant pessimism, not helping oneself. If you sit and you overly vent to your friends, your family about every bad thing that's happening in your life over and over and over again, and you do nothing about it, what do you want from them?
Right.
You know? And then I also had to remind people that you're not talking about bringing this to a mental health professional. I'll sit and I'll listen to you vent as much as you want, but I'm a solution focused therapist. So we're gonna talk about options. We're gonna talk about solutions. We're gonna talk about, you know, what can we do? What's in your control? But I'm like, you can't expect your family and your friends to be equipped with the skills to necessarily help you through especially, again, the key word was like always going through something. It's always negative. They don't, you know, never have anything positive. It's like, people who are repeatedly in crisis, a lot of people feel helpless. They don't know how to help you.
Right.
And you can't be upset with them for that. You know what I mean? So that's just an example of how we talked about gratitude.
Right.
A little bit of gratitude can go a long way, you know, because in that example, it's like, if I can acknowledge that, like, yeah, I may have had a bad day, but I had something else that happened, you know, this week that was really positive. And that's the issue is we've been wired to focus so heavily on the negative things.
Right.
So much of my work is getting people to implement small bouts of positivity. Because the first thing people say is like, you know, when we talk about goals for therapy, they're like, oh, I just want to be happy. And it's like, what does that look like?
Right.
And are you carrying the expectation that happiness is a constant state of being? Because it's not.
Talk about that,
We
please.
have to be able to, there are so many other emotions that exist on the spectrum. You know what I mean? So I may wake up one morning and I may be content. And content is good enough for that day. I don't need to be in this elevated emotional space to feel like my life is going in the right direction, you know? And also, happiness is the only thing that people don't really understand that they have to also cultivate.
Right.
Like sometimes, unless you're clinically depressed, most people don't just wake up sad. You may have a day or so, but you can usually understand the source of your sadness, the trigger for that sadness. People aren't creating, you know, things or putting things in their day-to-day life that bring them happiness and wondering why the feeling feels so few and far between.
Right.
You can't wait till you go on a vacation every 3 to 6 months to feel happy. You know what I mean? If it's that coffee in the morning, if it's that after work workout, if it's that girls' night with your friends, if that's spending time with your kids, if it's that, you know, snuggle with your dog or your cats, like those are the things you have to give more weight to, because these are happening in your day-to-day and you don't even realize how good they feel for you.
Right.
Because we looking at all the stuff that's going wrong.
Right.
So usually it's like, I always try to ask people, like, what are you doing to create some of that happiness? You know, what are you doing to create moments of excitement or joy, or, you know, just go against this constant feeling of like bad, because nothing is all good or all bad.
Right.
You know, it's just, a lot of it is perspective. So if we can sit and it's interesting because that's why there's like this common thing where people who can identify with some sort of religion or faith, that they do better when it comes to mental health management because they can account for some sort of hope. You know what I mean? They can account for, though religion has a certain level of like gratitude attached to it, like a value of gratitude.
Right.
So their mind naturally goes there. Like for me, as somebody who is, you know, considers myself to be faith-based, when we talk about the breakups, one of the things I have to, as I work through some maybe negative self-talk, is remind myself that like my higher power, the universe, they want more for me.
Right.
So that's a part of why this didn't work out. It's not going to align me with anything that wasn't there for me. And so we kind of have to use some of that. I understand that, you know, some people don't have a belief system, and that's okay. But there is a reason why believing in something that you can't see, you know what I mean? Or that you just, you feel like you're not just in this world by yourself.
You have hope.
You know, it helps in that arena.
Right. What would you say about, and then before I ask this question, you know, for myself, that's definitely one of the measures that I take is no matter what I go through, I always find a reason to be grateful. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's like medicine. It doesn't matter what's going on. I go back to just taking a breath and just being like, but there's just so much more to be thankful for. Mm-hmm. Just so much more to be grateful for.
Yeah.
And it gets me out of that state of mind.
Yeah.
Right. And in that place of, you know, like depression. It's just like,
yeah. And I think some people actually confuse that or conflict that with like this newer term called like fake positivity or toxic positivity, where I think that more so speaks to not acknowledging the reality. Like if I'm really feeling sad or I'm feeling down, I can acknowledge that.
Right.
But two things can be true at once. I can
Right.
acknowledge that like this is the space that I'm in and I don't like it and it's uncomfortable, but I can also understand that I have to work through those emotions, and the part of how I can do that is also by acknowledging, you know, the great things around me.
Right. And then, you know, obviously as well, how I like to state it, it's like, all right, yeah, I might understand that I'm sad, but I don't want to stay in that place. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, yeah, I'm sad, but the way out is through my gratitude. The way out is understanding that if it's fully out of my control,
Yeah.
then that's
I have
what
to
it
relinquish
is.
that.
Right. I have to let that go. Why keep that burden on me?
Yes.
To live my day to day on something I have zero control over.
Yeah.
And if I have control over it, then I need to take accountability and start doing the things, as you said, that are proactive towards making that better, towards making that happen. So what I wanted to ask you is, what are your thoughts on relationships and people who revert back to old relationships?
As far as like people getting back with their exes,
Right.
I think that there are a few factors to consider before somebody decides to do that, right? Like, because number one, both parties having an understanding of what broke them up in the first place, and what work has been done. Like, my friends will tell you, if they just, you know, broke up with somebody 3 weeks ago, a month ago, whatever, and maybe it's been like building up to that breakup, and they finally like, you know, okay, we done. And then like a month later, we gonna go for lunch and we gonna talk or whatever. And I'm like saddened because it's like, what has changed?
Right.
What has changed in a short span of time? You know what I mean? Like one thing I will say, because I've heard about like marriages where people like maybe got married young and then they broke up for years and then like they remarried 20, 25, 30 years later.
Right.
And I can appreciate that because I feel like you change so much during those periods where
Right.
you hopefully have done some work.
Right.
And to decide to come back together at that point, to me, feels more like it's not based on codependency. It's not based on attachment. It's more so about I see this person and they see me, and there's growth that has happened, and we're choosing each other now.
Right. It's like
you
two
know
different
what
people.
I mean? Yeah. And so I think that, again, it could work, but there just has to be a very clear conversations, again, understanding, do our values match up this time around? Do we understand what was our demise before? And is it going to be healthy?
Right. What do you think the odds are on that being a success?
I can't say, because I really think it's just a case by case basis.
Right.
I think that there are probably, depending on the time span in which people broke up and got to, I think that is a huge piece. It's
Right.
like, how long have you all been apart, and what work have you done
Right.
to to be able to maybe make this work a second time around. And again, have really that reason behind the initial breakup is something that has to be considered.
Right.
Because is it something that has changed? Is it something that hasn't changed? You know what I mean? Like if you, let's say your career was a truck driver, and when we first got together, you were just gone so much. I had needs that weren't being met. You had needs that weren't being met. If a year or 2 years later we decided to get back together and you still a truck driver, what's changed?
Right.
Because that's still going to exist. Those needs are still going to not be met,
Right.
Unless, let's say, now you're a local truck driver instead of a countrywide truck driver. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's just being realistic about like the conditions of the relationship and
Right.
what realistically has changed to make it work.
Right. And I think it's important too. And the reason why I bring that up, you know, in those instances where it's like, okay, time has happened, people have grown, new experiences and perspectives change, right? You begin to see the world in a different view, which allows you to see a person in a different view,
Right.
in a different way. But in terms of like those relationships where it's break up together, break up
Oh,
together,
hell no.
would that be something that you address in terms of like codependency, or maybe even like people reverting to misery loves company type of mentality?
Yeah. I think that sometimes when you have those relationships where it's that back and forth, where 1 week we together, the next week we not, most of it is solely just based on an unhealthy attachment and probably some codependency as well.
Yeah.
Because for some reason we can't figure out how to make this relationship work in a way that keeps us together. But yet we still want to keep coming back to each other thinking that something will change when we have not done any work. We haven't done any work to make it change. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, because of that reality, I can't attribute that to anything but there being a sense of codependency there of, I feel like I need this person, or maybe the chaos with this person keeps me distracted from having to do other things that I actually really need to do. Some people get very attached to the highs and the lows, where like I was saying earlier, like they kind of get their wires crossed, where because of this roller coaster, like I have these highs that feel so high, that feel so damn good, but the lows feel even worse.
Right.
And I'm chasing that high again. You know what I mean? A part of codependency is also in alignment with like an addiction, like a feeling like I need this person to function, or I need this situation to give me purpose, or, you know, whatever that looks like, or there's something in this relationship or in this person that is filling a void within me.
Right.
And I don't want to let that go, because
Right.
then if I let it go, then I have to acknowledge that the void is there, and then I got to try to find something else to replace it.
Yeah, definitely. Especially dealing with that void. You know, so many people have those voids that they don't.
You mentioned them daddy issues,
Right.
like those mommy or those daddy's issues. They gonna show up,
Right.
and they gonna point you when it comes to relationships. They're going to highlight what work you haven't done and what you're seeking in a person, and is that in alignment with somebody that is actually going to be a good partner, or are they filling a void of something that you didn't have?
Right. So when it comes to healthy relationships, what are some pillars that people should stand on or build on?
I would say knowing self, being okay as an individual,
What is knowing self?
just your ins and outs, the good things about you, your character flaws, you know, what's important, your insecurities, like really knowing self in that way, because then it makes it easier, you know, when there are lows or when there are things that you deal with. Let's say there's some insecurities or some triggers or whatever, you know how to communicate that to your partner because you've had to learn how to communicate it to yourself.
Right.
And so then it helps you all be able to problem solve better. So I think that's step one, is just kind of like having a very clear understanding of like how your mind operates, what your
Right.
triggers are, what your insecurities are, and how they've shown up in the past in relationships. But also I think there's a certain level of openness and willingness, again, these values that you have to have when it comes to having a healthy relationship. And communication, we already know, is like a huge one, because
that's major.
If we can't talk, we can't be. And that's any sort of relationship, right? Like, if you cannot talk to people or figure out how to have a conversation where there is understanding to be had, then we go nowhere.
Right. The biggest distance between two people is communication. So, with this book, what are some final thoughts or some final things of advice or pieces of advice that you would want to give to people or address in terms of getting to a healthier self, getting to a better state of confidence, and just not a perfect situation, but a better situation?
One of the things I talk about in the book is making sure that you aren't going against self. You can't claim and whine about wanting peace, but you let chaos in. You know what I mean? You can't say that you want a different outcome and you keep doing the same things. And so I think that overall it has to start somewhere. If it starts with a self-help book, if it starts with a therapy session, if it starts with, you going into different spaces that encourage and create, an environment where people can come and talk, which is something that's happening more and more now. The sweatshirt I have on is Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health, and they're an organization in Chicago, and they hold conversations pretty weekly, and then do bigger shows, whatever, where they sit and they talk to people about mental health and about emotional wellness. And I know that it's probably been a great stepping stone for people who are considering therapy or they want to learn more about their mental health. And, people go into space and they leave feeling, not judged, and being able to really kind of just take in, even if they're not ready to talk. And so there are more organizations, and I follow a bunch of private practices who offer like free group spaces and all of these, virtual groups, just to give people a space. But you have to take advantage of it, because one thing you'll see is, people are mental health because it's trendy, but they're not doing no work, they, and so I'm all for people who are in one way or another just making a stride. And that's all I encourage people to do, is to just make a stride. It's not enough to talk about it. It's not enough to tweet about it, Instagram about it. Like, where has that work started in you? And one thing you'll start to realize is when you do start that internal work, you may have a little less patience for other people who are not doing that work. And things start to become clear as you start to do your own work. It's like, man, I'm maybe around too many people who see no error in their ways, who are not striving towards being better, who lash out at others, and I witnessed that, and maybe I encouraged it before, but now I see things through a different lens because I've started my own work and not using a bunch of stuff to distract you from it, because we live in a world full of distractions, and it makes it very easy for people to avoid having to look within. Alcohol, drugs, social media, you know what I mean, being out, and especially with stuff being back open and at somebody bar or club, you know what I mean, like what you have to realize, like if you're running from something,
what are you feeding yourself? Well, Brittany, I appreciate you for coming on and sharing all those gems. Even for myself, like whenever I'm sitting across from anybody and having a conversation, as I'm listening, I'm also reflecting. And so I appreciate you coming in and being transparent and open, and even using yourself as an example that shows that you are confident in what you do. And I think that's very important, right? That type of confidence is either going to draw people or push people away. And that's going to say one or two things, about that person. But having this conversation with you, I think, is a needed conversation. And especially those who are viewing, I know for a fact somebody's going to be able to take this and better their life. And that's what this podcast is about. So So I want to say thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. But obviously, before we do go, if you could let people know where they can get in contact with you, where they can get the book, if they want some advice, or just all the things that you shared here, where they can connect with you right there.
Okay, so we have a few different methods. We have my website, which is www.bethechangetS.org. You can inquire about services or other resources with me through there, as well as purchasing the book, The Things I Wish I Knew. Instagram, connect with me on there. It's at BeTheChangeTS. And I think that's it. Oh, like I mentioned earlier, I have a YouTube where I kind of talk about everything under the sun: mental health, emotional wellness, relationships, sex, current events, you name it, I talk about it. And that's Keeping It a Buck with B on YouTube.
Keeping It a Buck with B. I'm gonna have to jump on the podcast.
Yeah,
we got to make it happen.
I know I'm not as organized as you, but
That's all right.
I'm gonna get it together.
This is motivation.
It is. I'm very motivated.
And I appreciate that. And for everybody out there, if you've yet to subscribe to the YouTube channel, make sure that you do subscribe, like it, comment, share. If you want us to talk about any particular conversations or topics of discussions, please put it in the comment section, DM me. Also, if you know anybody you feel that we can have a great conversation with, any particular people, will be more than happy to, look them up and potentially bring them onto the show. It's something that we want to do and be able to bring to you guys gems and food for thought, something that you can take that's applicable for your life. We're on all social media platforms, IG, Instagram, that's the same thing, Twitter. If you've not checked us out there, we put a lot of clips, short clips, things that you can take and share with, people that you feel might need those things. So until then, you guys take care. Peace.